Well, having lived in America during the period of the anti-apartheid struggle, there were quite a number of heavyweights, either in the Congress, in business, or in civil society, that resented the apartheid regime and what it did in South Africa. So people like Quincy and a number of others that we met along the way, Ambassador Young, Congressman Maxine Walters, and all of those. And most importantly for me as a business person, my interface was with the people like Randall Robinson, who headed up what was called Trans-Africa, which was a huge a protest movement against South Africa and calling for disinvestments. Now, Quincy and them, because of Quincy, what he was, Quincy got involved, and I got to know who he is. And one or two occasions, he came to some of the universities where I spoke. Now, but I got to know him a little closer when I was introduced to him by my brother and friend, Caiaphas Semenya, with whom I've worked and collaborated over 30, 40 years or so.
Yeah, and tell us about that interaction. First time now that you get to now interact with Quincy Jones at that level after he had listened to the lecture that you had delivered. What was it like? Because at that particular period, he was already Quincy Jones, who was renowned and had the ability to cross over the various sectors. And we know it was during the height also of racial segregation, which was a very important part in musicality at the time.
Yeah, as I say, his major interface, Quincy, was with the icons that you've just mentioned,
Yeah.
Letta and Caiaphas, Hugh Masekela, with whom he had collaborated a bit on Grazing in the Grass, and a number of others. You see, his influence. Quincy had one thing about him. And I think South Africans need to celebrate Quincy Jones because he loved this country. He understood. He tried to understand the culture. Now, people that were close to him assisted him in understanding the culture, but and most importantly, very early in 1977, when I lived in the States, he had gotten involved in the music called Roots, in writing the music along with Caiaphas, and the music sung by Letta Mbulu. And I was in that company of these people because they were good friends. I'd known Caiaphas, I'd known Letta from my days in South Africa. And so the question of what I really want to talk about is that he was not only a diverse musician that is multi-talented, but there was a concern too. There was a social side and the civic side of Quincy that wanted to know what is going on, what is about South Africa. I remember at one stage asking Caiaphas, what is this thing called Ubuntu? What does it denote? What is the definition of Ubuntu? And by the way, he named one of his daughters Kenya because he had not just before he came to South Africa. But for me, my biggest interface when he had come here with Oprah Winfrey, when Oprah was running the school, and when we took him around again with the leadership of Caiaphas, and I got to know him very close, not very close, but close enough to understand the character of a caring international icon who cared about not only about the music of the world, the music of America, big as he was, but about the human condition of South Africans.
Yeah, and from that interface, what is it that you take away from that?
Well, I take away someone who is willing, and I'd like, I've learned to try to be like him and others who care, show kindness, show compassion, show empathy, show relevance, especially to humanity. And, you have to understand that Quincy was also very helpful with South African students, particularly in the West Coast, who were in exile after 1976. He provided resources, provided support, provided assistance and guidance. So this is something that we can learn from a man that is as large as life, who also cares about the small things.
Yeah, and I think also the important bit around that is how somebody is able to use their stature the access to their networks and their context to bring to light also some of these aspects that you are speaking about. That sure, as the Rolling Stone has described him as a peerless music producer, but there is this other part to him as well that we don't speak about a lot.
And that's a diversity, you see. Quincy was able to cut across all the spectrum of the musical industry, cut across the social circles, cut across all of that, you know, descending from that crown, from that royalty, from that iconic structure that he was living in. Now, what we learn from that is something we all call humility, the ability to be able to relate to people, not considering the status that you enjoy. So when he was in South Africa, we took him to places like Soweto, took him to places where humble people live. We took him to restaurants. And actually there was a very funny side of him because he was quite a humorous fellow. And I will not forget the fact that he constantly, some of the things that he mentioned was that when he first came to South Africa, he had some cash with him. He wanted to give it to somebody to do something. A friend of mine, Danisa Baloy, mentions that he couldn't understand everybody that he wanted to give money said, no, I don't want this money, give it to this person. And his retort was, you know, if I was in America, the first person that I offered the money to would have taken it. But that was part of his learning about this thing that he called, and we all call Ubuntu.
Yeah, and I hope that he's satisfied with the explanation that he got about what Ubuntu is. And my argument has always been around Ubuntu, that it is an ideology. Thank you so much for your time. Truly appreciate it. Dr. Gaby Magomola, who has met Quincy Jones, of course, and spent some time with him, but through the likes of Kaifa Siminya as well as Mamlet Mbulu and Hugh Masekela. That brings us to the end of that conversation.